I've been asked a most fascinating question. To distinguish between guilt and shame. You know, what is healthy about both of them and what is unhealthy about both of them? And I want to say right at the outset, guilt as a conviction of wrongdoing and leads to repentance and change and a desire to go and put something right. Guilt, to me, is one of the fundamentals of logotherapy, and it is a healthy moral compass, whereas shame does the exact opposite. And this is what I want to go into today. Remember that Frankl said that there are three tragic factualities to life. One is pain, and the other one is guilt, and death, of course. Now, just consider those three fundamentals where Frankl said, unless you find meaning in those three, you won't find meaning in life. So, you know, if you want to know about how to use guilt in your session with logotherapy, listen very carefully. Suffering, as we know, just think about it for a moment. Suffering, Frankl said, corners us and makes us aware of what ought not to be. That is a guilt consciousness, isn't it? That you become aware of suffering often makes you aware of what have I been doing with my life? I'm not on course, or this is wrong. And therefore it provokes an awareness of what ought to be. And it actually has movement about it. That is what Frankl also said about a guilt, that, you know, live as if we are living a second time and about to make the same mistake we did the first time. And in other words, there is progress there. I learn. That is why Frankl said guilt is one of the fundamental factualities of life. It is embedded in our fallibility. And actually, as I would like to do with you tonight, is to see how it is a growth in moral comprehension and consciousness that is actually at the heart of logotherapy. As Frankl said, logotherapy is an education towards responsibility. What is responsibility? I am being called upon to act in a required, set before me way. And if I do, there is a release happening. I affect something of worth. I contribute something to life. I change. That moment is mine, stored into the rich granaries of my past. It's an achieved moment. So, you know, and even if you do not react in the right way, what does guilt do? It plagues you. And I want to also go into this, but before I do, just to add death at the end of the matter. Because death makes us aware of the passing time and that we don't have endless opportunities. We better get things right and get moving in the right direction. Time is running out. I was asked another question to answer, and I hope I will indirectly answer it as well, which was, how do you break through to a client? How do you really synchronize with them so that your session becomes an encounter? And now I want to actually illustrate this process as a developmental process of spiritual growth. And I want to start with that with the consideration of what Frankl said, the heart is restless until it has found and realized meaning. Now, that is the most abstract, or how shall I say it, existential way of experiencing guilt. You feel something is amiss in your life, that there's something more. And therefore, you can almost call it like an existential guilt. What am I doing with my life? So see how powerfully guilt impacts here. And if we trace the developmental path of a growth of moral comprehension and consciousness, which actually is what we are fundamentally created to be, creatures with a moral consciousness. In fact, you know, we're convinced of the fact that there was prehistoric man, but it was only when man began to have a moral comprehension, a moral consciousness, a conscience that you are being addressed and called to give an account of your actions in terms of how it impacts on your environment, on the people around you, not just people, but what do you do with nature? What do you do in each and every situation in terms of giving an accountable answer to your behavior? That was the beginning of Adam and Eve, to my mind. The growth of moral, or the awakening of moral consciousness. Now, you know, this kind of restlessness in its most beautiful and pure form, and if we look at it in the evolvement of child development, is what Frankl said, our inherent will to meaning, coming as it does from our spiritual center, which is actually who we are. Man is spirit. He's not soul, just psyche. You know, the Bible speaks about getting your soul into possession. And Frankl spoke about, first of all, the healing of the soul. In other words, a kind of a self or ego caught still in psychological conflict, haven't broken through totally onto the uniquely human level, which is what? Openness to being addressed, openness to the transcendent, that you can be called upon and expected to answer. And if you look at a healthy development of guilt in children, you will see that a will to meaning is experienced, especially when the child connects to the loving and significant other. When there is a pleasing response from the significant other. You know, when actually the evaluation that comes to us, you are all together, like it says in the Song of Solomon's, altogether lovely, my love. Children learn to discern right from wrong in terms, if it's healthy, in terms of, if I do what is right, what I want to connect, and when I do connect and respond to the parental figure, and there's a feeling of togetherness, then the child experiences meaning. And whereas, you know, the instruction of a child, you know, not to damage what Frankl called our unscathed human spirit, which is a pure, pure spirit. It has, why is it pure? Because it's got the potential to grow to human greatness, to what Frankl called the echo homo level of life. Look at this man. Look at this woman. Wow, what a role model. What effect they have on the world. And this is the kind of figure that looks right to the heart of another person and can see their uniqueness and worth, like a parent that does train a child there's only one way of training, and that is through love. That, when you damage the relationship, when you do something that is hurtful to your sibling, or hurtful in terms of rebellion against the will of your parents, the child experiences this sense of disconnectedness, which is a sense of displeasure. Because, Frankl spoke about childhood as dominated by the will to pleasure, but not the kind of pleasure that indulges, that is a self-indulgent kind of unhealthy pleasure. The pleasure, the joy of connecting and being at one with. And if you look at guilt this way, because what happens with a child is that as they mature, these yardsticks of love, of what love demands and commands, and what that love, when you do respond to it, blesses you with a sense of meaningful connectedness, becomes part of the choices that the child makes, becomes internalized, and becomes a part of an independent conscience, where the child can begin on its own to decide for itself. And that's why Frankl called the teenage years more dominated by the will to power, but not the will to power that is distorted in the world, but the will to find an identity, to find an inner power of saying, this is me, this is what I believe in, this is who I'm going to be. That struggle for your unique identity. And you can see how guilt in this way is something loving. It sits lightly on the shoulders of a child, or on anybody, on your client. When they feel guilty, you want to provoke them to a sense of responsibility. Respond and act on your feelings of guilt. What is your guilt telling you? Something is wrong, something needs to be put right. What is it that you have to put right? Why is your heart restless? And only if you do the right thing will that restlessness go. When you have understood the meaning of what is being presented to you and that is being asked of you, and if you respond to it in the right way, it releases you into a greater and greater freedom, away from guilt, into joy, into the full embrace of life. Now, before I go to shame, let us consider the two fundamentals of logotherapy. Well, I'm looking at somebody very handsome over here. Svi. Hi, Svi. Anyway, yeah, the two fundamentals of logotherapy. That is also answers another question that one of the students raised and said, what makes logotherapy unique, different from other therapies? Logotherapy is unique because it's not a theory. It's not a worked out set of assumptions. It can never be dogmatic in terms of using it like a technique on your client. That's dogmatism. You are, like Frankl said, you cannot force meaning into being. You've got to help your client to discover it. So you will never preach or give advice or go according to a set pattern of what you are to do. Because if you lose the what for that life is about, you fall trapped to the how to. Then you want to work out a technique because you're not sure of these two fundamental principles of logotherapy. And what are they? Frankl said, what our clients need, what we need, is an unconditional faith in the unconditional meaningfulness of life. Life is always precious. It is always invitational. It is always embracing, and especially when you suffer. because then you cry out why. You reach out with your why to the how of meaning, not of you lose, you almost lose the what do you call it, stillaces in English, the outward structures in a building while a building is being completed. That falls away, because if you are now open to the fact that life is always meaningful, doesn't matter. In fact, it becomes even more precious, even more meaningful when you suffer, and when you become aware that this suffering is something I have to overcome, something I have to, it speaks to me. I have to do something. If I see, what has been done by perpetrators on victims, then I want to do something to stop the perpetrator and help the victim, right? That we are here to overcome suffering, to triumph over suffering. But, suffering like guilt, it's something you have to realize to do. It's something that grows in terms of comprehension. So this is such a fundamental yardstick. Do I experience life as unconditionally meaningful? If you don't, if you are worried about the future, if you have what Frankl called a basic distrust in life, I'm not sure that life is something meaningful. It may be something frightening. It may be something I want to withdraw from. It's something I'm fearful about. Look what happens to you. You are withdrawing from, okay? And so often, because of this fear, people build up a kind of a solid system to go by, a technique to go by. And all they do is to place a barrier between themselves and the world. You cannot reach a client through technique. Forget about it. If you know the what for, the how to will flow spontaneously. Like Frankl said, don't put success there. I've got to, heal this client. I've got to forget about it. Take all of that away. Tune into that this is a uniquely given moment in your life to be encountered by what is required in your response towards this client. And then we come to the second fundamental basic principle of logotherapy, because this faith in the unconditional meaningfulness of life is predicated upon belief in the unconditional meaningful and the unconditional worth and inherent dignity of the human person. This is something we work towards, and this would make for an encounter in your session with your clients when you look not at the outward problems that they present, not at the defenses that they put up, not on, listen to the justifications or the escapist kind of thinking. When you bring them down to rock bottom, who are you? I want to meet you. And you know why? Because you are singularly unique, fully equipped with the capability to rise to great human stature, where your life will take on significance and meaning that will impact for the better on your world. This is the what for. My life is given to me as a gift for the what for. What am I to accomplish? What am I to achieve? What am I to strive after? And then, you then release your client on away from the psychological self, still struggling with emotional conflicts, fearful of life, still hung up in problems that they have experienced or negative influences they have been made captive to. And you open them up to being themselves, to relaxing into who they are, and to let go of all the this and the that and the other, and to become focused, to be with you in the meaning of this particular moment. And when the client, this is the healing power of logotherapy, because if you look at your client with this open look of love, unconditional, then you will discover that person would come out of their shell. As soon, you can experiment with it with babies. Put up a cold and aloof front and see what happens to them. But be warmly inviting and see how they come alive. It's not so difficult to grasp. And the thing is, it's absolutely impossible to experience the uniqueness of your client if you don't believe in your own uniqueness. Which if you don't, and now I'm coming on to the subject of shame, if you don't, what happens? If you really put yourself in a position of shame, as inferior, as not as good as nothing in comparison to, you fade out of the picture, don't you? And if you are still struggling with, accepting your own wonderful self and allowing yourself to become open to the world that is invitationally there to meet you and to make you grow. And this is then you are on that human level where otherwise you'll have feelings of distrust. You'll be uncertain in your relationship with your client. You might even then want to become dogmatic. You want to teach, or you feel you should, and then you lose that encounter, and you cannot break through too. That is why our training in logotherapy is so focused on you, on your perceptions of life, on your discovery of who you are and why you are, where you are, for what. And this is this kind of openness that makes you then not this ego self trapped in conflict and confusion and based on fear, but when you are released into love and unconditional faith in the beauty and the magnificence of life, and this trust, this awesome gratitude that you've been given the gift to experience it, to be part of it, to connect to it, to be part of this greatest story. And Frankl said something that really made it to be a yardstick of my own life. Never stop learning. Never stop short of going forward. Don't say, okay, here I am. This is comfortable. This is me. This is what I'm. Don't. You will just shut yourself off from, because, like Frankl said, the future comes to us, beckoning into the present moment, forever moving us forward to a destination we can't even imagine how magnificent it is. We have an inkling of the world as it ought to be. And our striving is to contribute to what should be. Like Frankl gave that definition of the human person. He said, what man is not yet, but ought to be and should become. It's a question. Your life is one of becoming. That is why Solomon could say, "You're so becoming, my love. You're so open to me. You're so here in the moment. You know, the rain is over and gone, and the time of the singing of the birds have come. You've opened up to me and to life itself, and oh, how I love you." That is life. That is to be spiritually vibrant and mature. So what is shame? And I want you to work out the vocabulary with your clients. If a client, for example, said, "I feel so guilt-laden." Now, wait a moment. Guilt-laden, remember that I said guilt sits very lightly and invitationally in terms of a loving correction on your shoulders. That burden is light. It's not the heavy burden of do otherwise. It's not the oppressive kind of yoke of expectation that is put upon you and enforced upon you. And what does it do? It shames you. It does the opposite of inviting the person. It actually frightens them into a corner, either of trying to avoid punishment or trying to appease in order to get some kind of reward. And that is where Frankl said, where reward and punishment still are the yardsticks of behavior, conscience has not yet had its say. Conscience has a very different say to shame. And shame is actually the internalization of punitive yardsticks of conditional love that has been placed upon you. You will be loved if, you will be accepted if, not you are unconditionally loved. I can't wait to discover you. I want to foster and enhance who you are. I can't wait to meet you. Like Frankl said, love, if it's true love, sees the unique potential of the beloved. Like he said, if we treat man like he is, we make him worse. But if we treat him as he ought to be, we help him become it. This is faith in the unconditional dignity and worth of your client. You can't wait for them to come out and to become and to share more of, you know, that they've accumulated more in their lives than they even know. And this is where you can help them turn the negative impact of suffering experiences around. Instead of feeling shame, now you take on the responsibility of overcoming that shame. For example, I have been treated by my parents as if I was unwanted. I was neglected. I may even have been abused. And what opinions did I form of myself? Shameful opinions. That I'm not good enough. That I'll never be good enough. That in fact, I should never have been born, like Pan so rivetingly says about her end experience of being shamed. That shaming is evil, okay? To shame a child or to actually abuse them, to use their minds. I say the uttermost evil in my mind is to imprint on the innocent mind of the child an indoctrinated idea to either, become to hate and to use the child as an instrument of your own power, or in exercising power over them to keep them down. What started my journey into logotherapy was, and I think I told it in a video before, but let me just repeat this. was when I was sent a patient that was diagnosed as catatonic schizophrenic. She didn't speak and she hardly moved and she was catatonic. But you know, just my desire to break through that catatonia, within this mental illness, to discover, her name was Anne, to discover Anne. And you know, I just looked at her in this kind of a way. I just sat with her in this kind of a way, waiting for her to emerge, believing she is there, and she did. So you know how powerful, I don't think we know how powerful logotherapy truly is. You know, I'm reminded when I gave my first plenary session at the United States Logotherapy Institute, their international conference, and I spoke along these lines. Dr. Barnes, who was the president, said, "This is what I wanted to hear for 43 years. I haven't heard it quite like this." And, you know, he said to one of his students that failed to come to join that day, he said, "You've got stones in your pocket. If you had come, they would have turned to diamonds. We don't realize what diamonds we have." And in fact, you know, we have to discover that we are diamonds and that we are shaped into incredible pieces of beauty by life's experiences, if we respond to it, and not withdraw from it. And you know, that is why I fight against shame, because Anne, the schizophrenic patient that I saw when I was still in training as a clinical psychologist, when she came out of herself and she went home, her mother controlled her own mental illness by keeping Anne sick. So when Anne started getting better, and what Anne did was to angrily show that she is, this mother came back to the hospital and insisted that she be withdrawn from therapy with me. And the psychiatrist drugged her to a point that I lost her. But that, and I still believe that maybe what has awakened in Anne will never die. A little candle that was lit, and that because life is incredibly compassionate, and that she was afterwards perhaps in circumstances that would allow that little flame to flicker more brightly. But this is what I wanted to do. This became my passion, like it is the passion of Viktor Frankl, like it was. He said, "I want to rehumanize psychiatry." We don't see the patient as a person. We don't see our clients as a person. So there you are. I just want to also now in closing, read you what I wrote in terms of guilt and shame, and to discern between the two. Guilt has the freedom of perspective. Think about it, of being our own judge and jury. True guilt cannot happen without your transcending outside of yourself and from a distance looking at yourself as if you would look at somebody else, judging your own behavior, critically evaluating it, and giving your own judgment. So guilt has self-transcendence and self-detachment, which are the two cardinal features of being human, as Frankl spelled it out to it. Guilt is an act of self-transcendence. From a self-detached point of view, We can hold ourselves to account by looking at ourselves like a concerned outsider. Did we live up to what we know we ought to have been and could be, but that we failed to do? And why did we fail? We have to address our fears. We have to address our kind of defensive modes that make us hide away from life. We have to develop the courage to be, as Paul Tillich put it. Guilt paves the way to repentance and change, to restitution and making things right, to undo the harm we have done to others by asking their forgiveness. And I'll never forget, you know, my first day at the United States International University, where Frankel had invited me to join his first English logotherapy training, that this is what he said. Every day is like a precious open page on which you write. And you know, you not only write things that you've enjoyed, the encounters that you had that were uplifting. You also record the problems you had. And if they were solved and you approached them the right way, wonderful. But if you didn't, it was appointed to the next day, to another opportunity to put it right and to move forward. And eventually you want to have a book of life that you can open up with pride and say, I have lived my life. I was not afraid to live it as it was given to me and as I was challenged to live it in order to experience its full, unconditional worth and beauty. Shame, in comparison, places us into the bondage of self-absorption. We lose rational thought and perspective. We cruelly judge ourselves. We feel in shame before others. We appease and seek to escape the threat of punishment. Shame puts an oppressive burden of self-blame upon us. And that is the super ego type of guilt. And don't you, I know, actually the word guilt is so wrong. Self-imposed shame. That the super ego, you know, that Frankel, Freud saw the self only within the psyche. And in the psyche, the self is still in conflict, okay? It's caught there by various problems. It's not moved on to the uniquely human level. You're only on the uniquely human level if you are open to life. Otherwise, you're shut in by shame. So guilt speaks the truth and shame lies. And I always said psychopathology is our misperceptions. It's a lie. It's a lie we have to come out of in order to experience the truth of its opposite. And it's the truth of the opposite that sets us free. So I said here, as logotherapists, we are to help our clients see the truth of what life is expecting of them, namely, to believe that life is always accepting, invitational, and encouraging. If it's not, it's a distortion. It hides what life really is. So, and because life seeks our full embrace as people of infinite worth and potential greatness. Thank you.